thank you very much to everyone for joining and welcome to our event today. My name is Ciel Vaughan and I'll be your host. This is the second installment of a series from Share Screen Africa that we're running in collaboration with the African Wildlife Economies Institute. And the title of this series is Exploring Can Wildlife and Agriculture Coexist? And that's from an East African perspective. So just before I welcome our fantastic speakers today, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do all keep yourselves muted during the presentation just to avoid any distractions from our speakers. If you want to have your camera on, that's absolutely fine, as long as you don't have too wild of a background, too much movement. Once our speakers have finished presenting, we will have a Q&A session. So if a question pops into your mind during the presentation, feel free to pop it in the chat and I can read it out afterwards. Or at the end, if you're feeling brave and you'd like to ask the questions yourself, then you can put your hand up using the function or turn your camera on and wave at me, and we'll go to you to ask your question. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our two wonderful speakers today. First off, we've got Mr. Damien Bell, and Damien describes himself as a social innovator at heart, and he founded Honey Guide in 2007 after 20 years working in East Africa's tourism industry. And he's been the executive director there for 17 years, leading community-driven conservation strategies that benefit both people and wildlife. And under his leadership, Honey Guide has become a regional leader known for their practical, sustainable conservation solutions and managed by local communities. And then with him sitting in the picture is Mr. Sam Shaba. Sam is the CEO of Honey Guide, and he's been with the organization since 2014, previously as the program manager. He's passionate about using technology and innovative business strategies for community-led conservation. And Sam also holds a BSc in wildlife management and an MBA for conservation leaders, driving transformative change in Africa's conservation efforts. So thank you so much for giving us your time and expertise, Damien and Sam. I'm going to hand over to you now.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here and to share some of the learnings we've had, the ideas we've got, and I'm really looking forward to some of the questions and discussions at the end of this session. We're going to take you through a little bit about, some tools that we have learnt and used for communities to protect their crops. But prior to that, we'll just add a little bit more value as to why we're working in community-based conservation, and also we'll be talking about how it's related, some of the work we're doing in this HWC to protection and things like that. A little bit about ourselves. Myself, Sam, and Sam have worked with Honey Guide for a number of years. We've explored it. We really view community-based conservation as a social enterprise. And we've been working in northern Tanzania exploring these approaches to how to get community-based conservation work for both people and wildlife. We are working across Tanzania, roughly 2.2 million hectares. Our impact is spreads across around 300,000 people, and we work with community wildlife management areas, 12 of them in Tanzania currently. These community wildlife management areas are where communities have set aside for, in a sense, conservation, protecting wildlife. They vary in size. They can vary from between 200 square kilometers up to 4,000 square kilometers. They can vary in number of communities they're having to support, anything between 6,000 communities to 30,000 people. And they vary in number of villages that have collectively put this land. We've got a WMA, a wildlife management area. We'll use often the term WMA. We've got some WMAs that are only 2 villages and some that have, I think up to 30 villages. And obviously that gets more complex. So that's what Honey Guide does in a nutshell. Now, the question we'd probably also need to ask is, why do we work? Why work with communities in any regard and in any situation? I think we've got to look back at. I'll give you an example of the Serengeti National Park, and we could use this as an example area. Serengeti National Park was formed in the 1950s, 57, I think, as far as I remember. Regardless, at that time, the population of Tanzania was about 8 million people. Today, 60 years on, it's now at 60 million people. And therefore, more people, the conflict is going to increase between, yes, there are landscapes and there are people moving into potentially where wildlife had a lot more freedom and they got less freedom. And there are a lot more areas today where wildlife are living with quite densely populated or more densely populated areas than they were previously and having to exist together, coexist. We still we still are looking at a lot of areas in Tanzania where communities live. There is a lot of wildlife. These national parks are not fenced in. They're not closed ecosystems where wildlife actually, in a lot of these areas, take, for example, the Serengeti National Park, wildlife actually has to move out of the park into community owned and managed areas, well known as the Masai Mara, where you've got the reserve, but you've got a lot of conservancies around the Masai Mara that are all community owned. And in Tanzania, we've got the Macau Wildlife Management Area, the Ikona Wildlife Management Area. And so wildlife has to move outside. And there is a figure being thrown around where we're saying roughly around 60% of wildlife lives on community land, lives outside national parks. Put it this way, a lot of wildlife lives outside national parks, and we got to find solutions to enable this wildlife to live together with man if we're looking at a future today. And so, and generally, as we approach conservation, I think we're all aware that there are different facets in conservation. We've got, and the generic conservation, you've always got this wildlife protection. We tend to overemphasize our time there and our investments there. We've got human wildlife conflict, which is what this conversation is going to be about today. There is obviously governance and management is a complex area to work on, and that's primarily where Honey Guide spends most of their targeted focus is in there. There's the business enterprise of conservation. How do you get the money in to make it work? And then there's the awareness, how do you get people around these areas to understand what it's all about? So those are the in general, but you'll see in this talk here, like I say, we'll be talking about human wildlife conflict. However, I want you to be aware that we in Anigad, we look at how human wildlife conflict mitigation programs can potentially have positive effects on wildlife protection. And why do we have to connect the two is because wildlife protection is insanely expensive. And it basically, consumes around 80% of an operating budget. When we're looking at protection, we got to understand that unless we have ways of reducing this cost, okay, we're going to have another problem there. So how do we integrate? How do we make sure that human wildlife conflict supports and can reduce the pressure? And the reason why it's so expensive is that it roughly costs around $70,000 a year to keep a unit on the ground. And that's a unit is what you see in front of you right now is some guys in a car. And in models across Africa, when we looked at it, you're talking about roughly 25 square kilometers allocated to one ranger. It's a typical format we use. When I've researched and looked at costs, many conservation areas are spending around $800 per square kilometer to protect. And we have played around and we've got one community area down to $23 per square kilometer. And this was primarily how this was done was re-looking at what the role is of a ranger and moving it from being a policeman to being more of a fireman, where they're responding to communities' calls. And so, if we want those local communities to be engaged and to provide information and support conservation, it must be beneficial to their lives. Therefore, the community-based conservation model is about benefits. And we often see talks about how schools are being developed, how clinics and how different conservation models are building schools or supporting kids to go to school, which is very valuable, and I'm not knocking it by saying this. However, we must not forget that food on the table is equally valuable in the livelihoods of people living around and within nature. So Sam is going to talk to you a little bit about a study we did some time back and how things have moved since then.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you, Damien. So we, like many other organizations, got involved in conservation. So around 2015, we did a study. We sent a cinema unit to one of these community areas to find out what they were concerned about in conservation. So while we were showing this film, we were also asking community about their interests, about their priorities in conservation. What would they want so that they could support conservation in these areas? Because we want conservation to happen in these areas. And what we found is that out of all the things that conservation was doing for them, or their priorities, over 41% of the people said, take elephants out of our farms. They said, we are really concerned about the losses and the costs of wildlife to our livelihoods. What they were saying is, hey, human-wildlife conflicts are our largest concern. It's not the tourism revenues. It's not the social inclusion. It is the losses that they have to incur by being with wildlife on their land. The crops they were losing, the livestock they were losing, and in some unfortunate cases, the people's lives and attacks. They were really concerned about that. And for organizations or conservation practitioners who want conservation to happen in community land, this human-wildlife conflicts really lets people lose faith in conservation. And so we want to talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room today is this problem of human-wildlife conflicts. And today we will focus really on crop losses, crop raiding by elephants, because that has been, for us and many other places in Africa, the far biggest problem for people's livelihoods. So on average, we did a study, people will lose in average communities in Tanzania, for example, over 70% of their crops to elephants a year. And that will be because of the attacks they get, usually at nights. And for most farmers, this will mean their entire food for the year. So we need to figure out how can we tackle this problem for people so they want to conserve, they want to protect wildlife on their land. And to do that, we need to find solutions that are affordable, solutions that they can be taken to scale, solutions that work, and solutions that are empowering community to continue wanting conservation on their land. People want methods that work. And what we have seen in most cases is that most solutions are either too expensive or can be done only at a very small scale, or they don't work, or they're really dependent on external support and donor support. And as soon as the project runs out, that solution also goes out. And we have been working to change that. A few years ago, we came up with this series, a toolkit for human-elephant conflicts mitigation. We call it toolkit, and we'll say it a lot. This toolkit is focusing on elephant senses of sight, of hearing, and smell, which are the strongest senses that elephants have. With this toolkit, we start with a flashlight, very strong, which targets elephant sights. And we go with the noise-making tools, siren or blowhorn, things that can annoy their hearing and they cannot hear so well. And then we go with tools that affects their sense of smell, usually using chili as the component that will drive them away. With these tools, we have developed over years, we've seen some very powerful results. The flashlight, for example, irritating their sense of seeing, 70% of the time, it will be enough to drive elephants out. We've been collecting data over time to validate effectiveness of each of these tools to prove that they work. Deployment of these tools needs to follow a series so that we are training the elephants. We are capitalizing on their sense of intelligence to remember that next time they see light, they can associate it to more irritating tools. And as you can notice with these tools is the more irritation you want, the costly it is. When you go to the further tools, they are more expensive to use. They are not reusable like the early tools. And because we always focus on the costs, we had to compare this toolkit and all the other methodologies that are used out there. This toolkit we are talking about, normally it will be around $700 per year per village to protect the entire village. And this will be the series of toolkits that you give to teams out there to protect. The introduction of the tool will need a bit of trainings to orient them on how to use the tools and to also set up the teams that will deploy these toolkits every night. Teams of volunteers, usually on the villages. When you put those costs together, we're talking about less than $2,000 per village per year. Now, think about that and compare that with other methods that have been used out there. Some methods that have been effective, but they are just too expensive for community to scale them across landscapes in Africa. A tool like a collar. To collar one herd, you're collaring a matriarch. It's about 5,000 one group. And talking about the size of herds in Tanzania and how many elephants we had, you talk about collaring at least 40 herds of elephants just to protect one village. And the cost of this can easily creep up to over $200,000 a year. Bee fences also have been used, but you're talking about $80,000 a year to protect one village. Chili fences also we have tried. They can help, but you're talking about $7,000 a year, comparing to less than $2,000 a year. And some of these tools are just too hard for community to maintain. So as soon as a third party, say a donor or a project runs out, most of these methods also go out with them. So with the toolkit, we're really focusing on choosing areas where the chances of success are easy, because the problem of crop raiding depends on situations, depends on seasons. We are focusing on protecting crops before they are damaged, not to just protect after entry. So we've been gathering data to record, do we protect crops before they are damaged, or do we just scare wildlife out of the farms? And we've seen some powerful results over the last 10 years using the toolkit. When we started, like I said, people lose 70% of their crops to elephants. We've been able to reduce that by over 90% using these simple tools. When we started, we had a team of 30 volunteers from the villages to just deploy these tools. Those teams have grown up to 800, in some places up to 1,000 people, going out at night, protecting their own crops without any of honey guides or any external supports. They are doing it themselves. And that's what we want to see, because that is more sustainable. That brings more ownership of the problem and ownership of the solutions that comes. So the other advantage that we get with the success is that we have seen that by helping community deal with the crop raiding problem or human-wildlife conflicts problem, people are more willing now to defend wildlife and natural resources. In most places where this has been tried, people will be willing to even give information when they are seeing any threats to wildlife. We've worked in places where just for the last 10 years, there's been zero elephant ivory poaching incidents, because people are the protectors of wildlife. And this is what we want to see, because without the people wanting to protect that natural resource, the wildlife that moves out of national parks, these wildlife and the national parks will not survive, and will not have them for many years. And so there's a lot of things that we've learned during these years, where Damien will take us through some of the lessons and the things we have in stock to keep this even better.
So thanks, Sam. That was great. So we're looking at concepts here, like Sam said, that can be scaled up, okay, that remove the dependency on donors for it to exist and survive, because that will make communities, anyone you give an idea to, and yet they can smell that as soon as the donor goes, they haven't quite got the reins, got to grips, will make them nervous. So we need to have scalable solutions. We need to have solutions that empower communities, that are affordable, etc. And so Honey Guide is constantly looking at new ideas, and we got to look well out the box for these new ideas. I think sometimes it is a little bit frustrating that we can see, and I think we all understand, that human-wildlife conflict is going to be a huge problem for tomorrow. I mean, look at Botswana, for example, where they have 130,000 elephant. They know it's well over what they should be having, and they're having a lot of problems with conflict. And this is going to be our problem for tomorrow. And we need to come up with solutions, and we don't see enough innovation in this space for human-wildlife conflict. We looked at, Sam mentioned our toolkit that looked at the smell, the sight tools, and the hearing. And when you look at any animal, such as an elephant, that has very poor eyesight, and they're mostly raiding crops at night, they're depending hugely on their capacity to hear, and smell. And if we look at what that means by hearing, it means that they can hear their others in their group, their family group, talking to each other. They can hear what's coming around them, what's moving around them. They can hear whether an animal's moving through the grass, or whether people are walking around, or whether there's heavy breathing. These are all things that can help them make decisions and communicate, and help understand the risks they're in as they are raiding crops. And believe you, elephants know when they're raiding crops. They know when they are doing something wrong. Just partly because as soon as you come in and break up the party, they immediately run away, and they know where to run, and they know where safety is. So it's not like they're surprised by anything. So when we're looking at tools, and the other one, of course, is smell, is critical for them. They want, and that's why we've already heard the chili powder and the chili fences, etc., do affect them, because they depend on smell. They've been led to the crops by smell. They smell the sugar in the maize from a long way away, and that's what's attracted to why it's such a good crop to go and eat, because it's got such good rewards. And so we're looking and exploring this new tool here, and they have several other tools. This is called the noisy ball, and it started out with your first iteration there, which is literally a sponge ball wrapped up with a bit of wire, and inside that we throw a siren, some batteries, and we scale it up. And we made 120 of these things, and put them out to these communities. And you can see a guy there who's holding 5 or 6 of them. And what this is a very simple thing. There's a noise, a screeching noise, unbearable noise in it. There's some flashy lights in it because it helps to find the thing at night. And all the guy has to do is turn it on and throw it at an elephant. And we have found that 95, nearly over 95% effective. In other words, every time they throw it at elephants, they run out of the farms. They're gone. And so these are the kind of ideas that we got to continually look at and understand. And we got to be ready to continue learning and engaging with people, engaging with the communities, engaging with the people who are actually doing the work, and finding out what they like about the tool and what they dislike about the tool. For example, we did try chili fences in one landscape. Every community in every area is different. One community area, very excited about it, have taken it on, and some individual farmers have taken it on. But when we tried it at a more of a village level, we found that the leadership struggled to get enough people out into the field to really trial and to keep on putting the chilies up on this thing. It was a very cumbersome. You had to turn lots of chilies into powder. You had to mix oil with it and hang it up. And so they found it very hard to motivate their community members to continually going out. So at a community level, it failed. At an individual farmer level, it worked. So we are constantly looking at what do we need to do to continually being on top of the learning edge here as to developing tools. How do we reevaluate things? What's happening? How do we get the funding in there? How do you build the trust in the concept by the farmers? And how do you make sure that the wrong strategy, we're not doing fencing when we should be doing bulls, or we're not doing chili fencing when we should be actually doing beehive fencing? And so all the different ideas need to be evaluated to make sure that when you are approaching a farmer, they are fired up. We had problems where, how do you make sure that if you've got these electronic tools, so they can be charged, then solar power charging? But things change. Nowadays Tanzania has spent a lot of investment in enabling, making sure that electricity is getting to villages. So you're seeing development help things. Some of these tools, like both the little ball and this chili, the toolkit, work only at night because it's a time when the elephants can't see the people, so we're using that. So these are and often we look at initiatives that start small, and once you see success, they all grow on their own. If farmers see that methodology and the approach that's being worked on by their neighbors is actually working, is saving their crops, guaranteed they will start to invest in it. So it's all about designing and developing tools that farmers are able to invest in, that do make sense. And we create those kind of tools, they will not need a donor to buy the tool. They'll buy it themselves, provided it's there. There are problems we've had with data collection, and this is something that always is going to be a problem, is that once a farmer has got a tool that works, they're not interested in providing data because they don't need to right now. They've got their solution. So us out on the R&D who need data in order to understand and evaluate tool use, and also data to raise funds, that data can dry out once the tool's working. The farmer doesn't need it. But there you go. That's what it is. And last, I'd just like to say that what are we trying to do here? In a way, we're not trying to save crops. Crops is the means to. And I'll look at this little picture we have here, where the guy in the blue actually is one of the field teams that are out there, and he's been called by the old guy wearing the hat of the Maasai guy there to come to his house. And because this guy, they work in crop protection. And you can see his field just behind him. He's got some crops there. And beyond that, you can see some wilderness. That's the wildlife management area. And they're looking at his son, who was out in his farm in the morning. And while he was out in his farm at that morning, his son came across a buffalo. And the buffalo charged the son and just nicked the back of his neck with his horns before the son fell to the ground and the buffalo disappeared. And what we're trying to do here is really that old man in that picture there, he did not advocate for the buffalo to be killed. He did not jump up and down saying, we got to stop this wildlife coming in here. He was concerned about his son, as he should be with his father. But we want to make sure that people like this man here continue to be conservationists, continue to understand the situation they're living in. And we want to help and make sure their lives are easier living in that landscape. We do not want to see that man ever have to have that problem again. We don't want his son to grow up hating wildlife and seeing that that was a barrier to his life. That's what we're here to do as conservationists. That's our goal. So, Sam, have you got anything to add to that?
One thing to add is that it is really tough for people living in these landscapes to live with wildlife. It's not easy. And we practitioners and those who want to help, the best way to help is to find easier solutions for them. The problem is complicated enough that we have to find simple solution, not even more complicating their lives. So we have been learning with the tools that we've been making. We have developed manuals and we have PDFs and videos that shows anyone who wants to learn what we have learned and what we know and the results of our tests. And we're very happy to share or answer any questions.
Great.
Thank you so much, Sam and Damien. That was a really fascinating presentation. Seems like you guys are doing incredible work and also some very powerful stories as well. And yes, questions. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to raise your hand or put them in the chat. I would like to start off just by asking you, Damien, what was the kind of your personal story that led you to starting something like Honey Guide?
Oh, that's a long story. That'll be another presentation, but I'll whip it into a really short one, I guess, was I think the journey that Honey Guide took, I had initially started with a focus on protection, feeling that that was what was really important to wildlife. We learned that actually the people who were asking to protect the wildlife, they had a different priority. That was human-wildlife conflict. And the journey has continued now into governance and management. And what has really driven me forwards is I feel we still haven't found and really worked on and come with a model that is going to be going to make communities successful at the business of conservation. And my background was in tourism. I have a business background in a sense, and that's what a conservation background. And so I think bringing that narrative to communities, talking about conservation, but not in a protect wildlife, but as a business, has been something that I enjoy, that challenge of working out how we're going to make that work together for people. How can we make conservation an interesting discussion for local communities? And I think bringing the word business is something that they will they appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And Sam, I'll actually
Sure.
ask you the same question. I'd be very interested to know what your kind of story was that pushed you towards this career path or life choice, as some people call it.
Yeah. So for me, it's been a combination of two things. The first is just the love of being in nature. Initially, I studied biology studies, so I got exposed to a bit of nature, and then I just loved to be there. And then the love of technology. And within Honeyguide, I got a good challenge. For the last 10 years, it's been making it work. Hasn't been easy, and there's been a lot of coming up with new out-of-the-box ideas, and that really gives me energy to get this challenge and to say, can we do it differently? Can we do it better? Can we do it sustainably? And I just been enjoyed that, and that's why I just keep enjoying coming up with this and working it within Navigate. Yeah.
That's great, Sam. Thanks. And Michael, I see you've got your hand up. Just quickly, in my mind, I was thinking, I used to work a little bit with the conflict, but with lions and cattle, and we were coming up with these bomas. But it seemed that the lions would always be able to learn. Do you have issues with the elephants kind of learning or becoming a bit passive towards the methods of deterrence that you're using, and then they just keep coming back?
I mean, I think you got to build that into your approach. You got to understand that the tool you're creating, first of all, isn't going to be the silver bullet. It's not going to do that. So what we are actually, again, thinking, what we're actually doing is training elephants to understand certain signals so that when they see the flashlight, okay, it's a journey of intensity. The intensity grow on them more and more so. So when you see the flashlight, it means we're going to get the horn. When we hear the horn, it means we're going to get something else. When we get that, we're going to get something else. And we'll just have to continue those so that you are training them at the early stages that if you see that flashlight, if you don't react to it, you will finally get, a very difficult time. We're seeing, interestingly enough, I was in a community area that we've been working with about 7 years or 8 years, and I asked them the other day, oh, well, why aren't you setting up teams like you used to in the past? And they said, well, the elephants aren't coming into our farm so often these days. They've stopped coming in because the
That's
intensity, they've been
fantastic.
so at it
Yeah.
all those years. So there is that to it. I think there's so much to learn about what's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Great, thank you. So, Michael, you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much. Damien, Sam, thank you for your presentation. You guys did a wonderful job and it was very informative. My first question is the majority of human-wildlife conflict that you see as it pertains to crops with elephants? I know you use that as your main example today, but are the majority of the conflicts you see between humans and elephants as it pertains to crops and crop loss?
Yeah. So the short answer there is yes. Over 90% is crop raiding by elephants, and then in some places, very low in the places that we've worked with, you see predation problem.
And in any
and just to add on that, there are other animals that go in and eat crops like zebras, etc. They're relatively easy and safe for anyone to chase a zebra off. What you need to have special tools and special approaches is for an animal as dangerous as an elephant is. So that's why one focuses on tools and approaches for getting elephants off crops, because you're trying to keep the people safe.
Right, thank you. And then second question, just a kind of a follow-up to that, is with people protecting their livestock. Is that also a big part of what you guys are doing in terms of reducing human wildlife conflict, or is the majority of your work with protecting crops specifically?
I mean, we focus on the crops because, give you an example, Randlin have worked with, and it's not far from here, it's 8 villages. All right. They have had, I think, in the last, 3 years, how many incidences with lions?
3.
3 incidents with lions and incidents with elephants. they probably have about 5 to 8 incidences a night in all their villages during
Wow.
the harvest season. So hence we focus on crops because it's in the face. It's on communities' minds daily, nightly. It's there, and therefore, what you're trying to do is to build up a tolerance. You're not really trying to stop crop damage. What you're trying to do is get the communities to understand that you're listening to them, you're trying to help them, and that you're trying to find solutions for them. They've always had elephants in their lives. This is not something new, and it's not something they expect to disappear. What they appreciate is when you, as a conservationist, branded as a conservationist, are listening to them and responding and trying as hard as you can to help them. And in that way, they will respond back by helping conservationists protecting wildlife by giving information intelligence on illegal activities in the area. So it's a little bit, you've got to be careful though. We're not trying to protect crops. What you're trying to do is get a behavioral change or maintain attitudes towards wildlife in communities.
Amazing perspective, you guys. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, Gail, I see that you've got your hand up if you'd like to unmute, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat afterwards.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm just wondering, in terms of, as you said, the business of conservation, very often human-wildlife conflict is about that sort of balance between your costs and your benefits. And most of these communities are associated with WMAs. So I assume there is some income coming from the WMAs. And how does that income, if you divide that income per village, how does that income compare to your toolkit costs? So if your toolkit cost is about 2,000 US, what is the sort of level of income per village in that WMA? Are they anywhere near comparable?
So, okay, short answer is no, they are not near comparable, but I'll give the figures just for the perspective. So a village, for example, a village in Randolin, one of the area where we work, would earn, say, $10,000 per year from their tourism revenues. And they will use that money to build community development projects such as schools, hospitals, and things like that. So the benefit will come at communal level. And then a household in Randolin would probably lose maybe $300 to $500 worth of crops in one incident if they were unlucky to not protect the crop. So the cost will go at individual level. So when that happens, a toolkit, in that just a rough average, we said a toolkit that will protect a village will be around $2,000 to protect a village, an entire village. So you're protecting first those individual losses that people would not incur. And that is very hard to share across community. If you get your loss, you don't share the loss with your neighbor. And also you're using the toolkit that is a fraction of the cost of the revenues that will come from tourism.
Thank you for your question, Gail. Okay, we've got some questions in the chat. We've got a question here from Holly. Holly, I'm wondering if you would like to unmute and ask your question yourself.
Okay, so yeah, what I want to get at, Damien and Sam, great presentation on the options that we have at sort of site level mitigation. But it's pretty well known to those of us working in this field that human wildlife conflict is really just a symptom of the root causes, some of which you covered at the beginning of the talk, Damien. And so I'm wondering, in getting perspectives from you guys, from your Tanzania side, how do you suggest working on those root causes? Because without doing that, there will be no end to human wildlife conflict, because we know it's increasing. And it's increasing because of the root causes, whether it's climate change impacts, whether it's increasing human populations, there are many of them. And so I'm kind of curious your views on that. I know you guys work very much at the site level, but putting Band-Aids on a cancer victim is never going to get us to the end road. And so I'm just interested in your perspective. It's something I'm spending a lot of time thinking about and working with some governments on. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. I'll have one response and then Damien can add. So nice to hear from you. So what we are doing right now is with coming into this problem with the mindset of saying we got to help community deal with the problem they are having today, like later this evening. We know and we are very aware of these macro issues, the root causes, things like climate change, things like policies, things like international conservation agenda. They are impacting population. They are impacting. They are making the problem even harder. We are aware of those. However, they are not within reach for community to resolve today, like later this evening. There are things that we should probably all in this call be dealing with to resolve that in the long term. But we have chosen at Honeyguide to deal with the solutions for today, for them to live with it, for them to adapt to the, for example, climate change issues, so they have food for their family, as the international community is dealing with climate change at the same time. So we've only picked that small niche to say, let's give them small solutions to deal with the problem they're having today as the international community and are dealing with population and climate change and the root causes.
Yeah, nice. I mean, I'm going to just throw in a couple of other ones and let's just see how we can go with this. Bear with me on that, Holly. The difficult question from Holly. One, I think, is that let's remember the goal here is not about saving 100% crops. Back to what I was saying earlier on, one of the goals here is to get committed to make sure that people living in these landscapes who have heard from the conservationist for the past 20 years see that the conservationist here is concerned about them and their welfare and their living and is doing as much as they possibly can to address that. So it's bringing the communities on board, and this is when we're talking about, you know, a larger, a different level of thinking. Is that it's about making sure communities are on board and are able to understand that they have the potential to create change. That there are tools out there and there are approaches out there that they're reach. The other one we've got to look at is there is legal frameworks to make sure that as development occurs, land use plans where crops should be where there's places for crops and there's places for wildlife, and that is going to be continue. And we got to make sure. And then there's the real safe zones in the national parks, and we have things like corridors. So yes, we've got to continue to design corridors to convince communities to give up land for corridors, but there is going to be very difficult to convince a community to give up land for corridors when they're just going to say, yeah, but when the wildlife goes into that corridor, it's just going to come out of that corridor onto my farm. So why should I give you more land when you can't keep your wildlife in the space? So we got to understand how one can turn around and say, no, we can create a corridor and with that guarantee the wildlife stays in. So these are the kind of, again, one's got to move on. And then there's the narrative. The narrative, I think, is something equally important, is that in general, the narrative has come from a foreign perspective on the role on wildlife in Africa. And this has to change. The fact that Botswana the other day is reaching out and trying to work on their problem. They have 130 elephant. And if we're saying elephants are growing at 7% every year, they're going to get 140, 150, 160. And nobody's giving them a solution on how to stop this growth because we've removed the only predator of the elephant, which was man. So, we have to understand that now they are just ahead of the game, Botswana. And so back to your what you were saying with the Band-Aid, one of the problems is the narrative is not being addressed at the right level, that the narrative about wildlife in Africa is often driven by somebody sitting in their sofa in the UK watching TV, and it's not being driven by the farmer who's out there trying to grow his crops and keep his life together, who's actually being raided by elephants. So I think They are very obviously touchy subjects, and I think we need to keep this conversation rolling. But those have to be addressed, those various areas, for the future of wildlife and to address the bigger concept of conflict. Does that help? Give you a little bit of something there.
Yes,
Okay.
Holly's messaged in the chat saying, I think we agree, Sam and Damon, as usual, would be worth a chat. And I saw Gail there clapping her hands virtually. So yeah, some really, some very hard-hitting stuff, but very true there. Thank you for that. Another question in the chat from Bo. Out of curiosity, has the private sector, i.e. large-scale farming, who may also experience human-wildlife conflict, have they taken any interest with the tools or methods that you're using?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you've got in a lot of our areas that we have here is that you don't get large-scale farming that has been put next to a conservancy or WMA. That's the first thing I think. Where in Tanzania, where you have larger farms that then have tractors and then have vehicles and management, they tend to have that resource of having a vehicle to chase elephants off. So they have not, where I know large-scale farming, they have not resorted to the toolkit because they've used the vehicles. And your average small farmer doesn't have a vehicle. Vehicles are a very efficient way of, elephants run away from, maybe come up with, if you go after an elephant with a car, it'll run away. It'll come back again, but it'll run away. Yeah. So I haven't seen anything of that, no.
Yeah, and I doubt private sector would want to use such a tool. Part of the success of these tools is having community as like protectors, as the guard. So unless the private sector will want to employ half the village or youth to be there with toolkits scaring off wildlife, which I doubt private sector would want to. They would just put either a fence or have vehicles all around doing that. So it's really just for community solutions, not private sector. We haven't seen that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we have 5 minutes left. We will be finishing on the hour, and there's one more question in the chat, which I think we have time for, from Spencer Gonza. Thank you for the amazing presentation. My question is related in trying to reduce human-wildlife conflict whilst achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So in the context of human-wildlife coexistence, how do local communities perceive crop raiding by wildlife, and what strategies are individuals willing to adopt to diversify their livelihoods and reduce these conflicts? That's question one. And following on, what role does community engagement play in shaping these perceptions and encouraging sustainable practices? Sorry.
Yeah, woof. I do hear this, and I do hear this, and I think we got to keep on looking at, can communities diversify? It's a nice, and it's important to throw that in one's radar when you're looking at solutions and things like that. But in many areas, that's a big ask. Okay, and I think we've got to remember that. That's a big ask. You've got a family out there, they're looking at climate change. They're being asked, they're being informed, or being convinced by the person producing the seeds that they should now buy this seed because we've got drought conditions coming along. So they're listening to that. They've got other things going on in their lives. And so coming along and saying, well, we've got to plant this particular seed, or you've got to change your lifestyle because of the elephant, okay, is a big ask. Because why do I need to protect the elephant? I think you've got to put it in the farmer's shoes. Why do I need to protect the elephant? And so I think when we are asking for things, we've got to put ourselves in the shoes of often. I think one forgets that, there's a very easy solution to this problem. Okay. There is easy solutions. There are easy solutions. They're illegal solutions, but they're easy. And what we're trying to do, and most farmers out there don't want to do illegal things. They want to get on with their lives in a simple way. So yes, I think it's important to see, can we grow chilies? Can we grow other things? Can they do other things? And that's there. But at the same time, I do not see that you can create large landscapes of changing crops or changing the day-to-day without the risks that you're then asking people to go into that don't have 5 years of trial. People have been growing crops, maize now for 30, 40 years, these landscapes. It's a proven model. I think what we're looking at is we're trying to stay ahead of the game here, saying, yes, if I was to turn around today and say, is crop protection a problem today? It's a problem. It's a big problem. It's not a huge problem. It's interesting enough, but it is going to be. Because if we're successful at conservation, we're only going to see increased numbers. We're going to see the Botswana case. The reason why people might go, oh, what do you mean it's not a big problem? Well, it's just we were developing the ball. Okay, so this little ball we developed the other day, which has been really amazing, and I did give you a video on that. We developed this ball. We tried 30 of them in one particular area. It really worked. And then what we did was we developed 120 of them, and we told everyone, hey, anyone who's got an elephant problem, call us, we'll send a team out. People called us, we sent a team out, we said, right, we want an elephant problem tonight. They said, oh, well, they haven't been for 2 weeks. So one's got to remember that some places don't have a huge problem, and it's not there. So I think it's understanding the context in this case.
Great, thank you so much. Well, we are basically on the hour, so I would like to, first of all, from Share Screen and from Awe, say thank you so much, Damien and Sam, for giving us your time and your expertise. This has been really, really interesting, and I've loved learning more about Honey Guide and what you both do. Thank you very much as well to our wonderful audience from all over Africa, it seems, for joining today. Hope you all enjoyed the talk. The recording of this presentation will be available in 1 week from now on the Share Screen Africa website. The link is in the chat box. We've got a lot of messages here coming through of thanks, thought-provoking session. Thank you, everyone. So Damien and Sam will also share the comments from the chat box with you so you can reflect after the talk. And thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day. We will see you next week as well, same time, for the next installment of our talk.
Asanteni.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Asanteni. Thanks, guys.